So today I'm going to be making a copy of The Half-Life of Regret by Charlotte Matthews, which is a book by Unicorn Press out this year in August. The process that I'm going to follow is Smyth Sewn hand binding, which is going to be done with these sheets and these tools. So I'm going to go ahead and begin and give a sense of what I'm doing as I go along. What I've got here are some sheets that are flat, fresh out of the printer. I printed them this morning on something that's really conventional. It's an office printer. So this is toner. This paper is a little thick. It's 70 text weight paper, but this is going to be a book in 3 signatures. The first thing I need to do is to separate the signatures out. This is the first, or rather the middle of the third one, and I can tell that it's the middle because it has 2 sequential numbers across the spread. I've got 56, 57. So whenever you're looking at a sheet and you have 2 numbers that go consecutively across it, you know that's the middle of a signature. When you're not in the middle of a signature, like this one, you're going to have non-consecutive numbers like 54, 59. All right, so this is the middle of the third one, and I'm going to just take off the third one. I'm leafing through here to see when the third one ends. Okay, so I know that the third one ends because right at the bottom, right under it, I have another set of consecutive numbers, 30 and 31. Okay, so that's the middle of the second signature. And I'm going to remove it from the stack now too. That's the third one right there. This is the second one that I'm taking out. I'm just collecting together these sheets until I find another page with consecutive numbers across it. Now that's the middle of the first signature where it's got 4 and 5. So the first thing that I'll need to do is to put a fold down the middle of this first signature. And in order to do that, I'm going to make sure that my corners meet here and here. Make sure I've got a pretty regular V at the edge here. And I'm going to take this over here so that I can have something hard to lean on. All right, so what I did is I held this down, made sure I was even up here, and then I moved over to where the fold is, and I'm going to fold down from the middle, and then I'm going to fold up from the middle. And keep in mind that with my left hand I'm keeping these things stable over here as I'm putting pressure. And in order to make that crease even finer, putting pressure here with my left hand, I'm going to use my right hand to bone fold that crease. Again, I started from the middle and then went up and down, and now I'm going from the top. The reason that you'd want to get some crease in before you start working from one direction entirely to the different direction is because when you do that, you have a tendency to sort of reshape the paper in a skew direction, and you don't want to do that. All right, so that was creased, and now I'm going to uncrease it. All right, so you should be able to see with the shadow here that there's a fold there, and you do want to be able to perceive that because in a second we're going to put some holes right down the center of it. Now, we only folded that one, the first one. We still have our second and our third here. I'm going to put them in order from first to third. First on top, second behind it, third at the bottom. And now I have a stack of paper with some sheets folded right on top. And I'm going to now use this jig, which has some, it has some intervals marked as to where I'm going to punch holes. This is going to be 6 holes that I'm punching because it's going to be me going in, making a stitch once, me going in, making a stitch a second time, and then me going in and making a stitch a third time. So we need to go in and out 3 times, 3 times 2, 6. All right, so I'm going to use these cardboard back mats to provide a protective surface. And going to line this up here. Well, actually, I'm going to have to improvise because this jig is not the one that I should have brought today. So instead, I'm going to use something that I already prepared with, which is a pre-sewn book block. This is going to come into the process later on. But with this pre-sewn book block, I can see, all right, I sewed there, 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 and there. So essentially, it's bearing the marks of the jig. Technically, then I don't actually need the jig. So what I'm going to do is take this book block that I've already sewn with the intervals that I want, and I'm going to line it up against this fold. And what that means is I'm just going to use this awl to place holes in this fold next to where I need to sew. All right, so using a little bit of the shadow, I can see where the crease is, and I just place one hole there. I go from the bottom to the top, because whenever you place a hole in, you're kind of giving the stack some internal cohesion. It's not like you could throw this at a wall and it would all stick together or something. But if I sort of pick at the top one, if this book weren't here, they'd kind of stick together a little bit. So you want to make sure that's sticking together there in the right place and there in the right place before you start getting the ones in the middle. That way there's less skew. All right, so that one. Okay, all right. Now just to model what I would have done if I had brought the right jig with me, it would have just been like this. I would have lined it up on the paper, and if my markings were correct, I would have just placed, the awl into the paper and made some holes next to the markings. But as you can tell, these markings don't really line up, and I could tell immediately that I had brought the wrong jig. And those don't line up either, So different jigs for different books. Obviously this one wouldn't have worked, but we improvised. It's fine. All right, so now I have made 6 holes in this paper, and I can see light through it. You always want to check to make sure that when you have punched the pages that you can actually see the hole on the back. I have 6 holes in the back now. So I'm done with these items for the moment. I'm going to work with the first signature now. The first signature is the only one that's been folded. I'm going to sew it using some 30 by 3 linen thread that is unwaxed. It's okay to use unwaxed thread on something like this because we're not going to be stressing the thread very much. It's only going to be passing through 3 signatures. What I've just done, and I'll do it again, is I have measured the thread against the vertical length of the sheets once, twice, and 3 times. The reason that I did that is because I'm going to be sewing through the middle of 3 signatures. There's no need to pull out a ruler and do this formally. If you can do it informally, then you'll save yourself time. So that's my thread. I'm going to get a number 1 needle. This is a needle that is, not very large. Its head is, more than ample enough to bring this through. I guess I should say the eye of the needle is more than ample enough to bring these through. This is called a sharp needle. It's not blunt. You can get these in sharp or blunt. I like the sharp ones because if you use them often enough, they'll become blunt, you know what I mean? So putting that in, doing a 1/2 hitch, which is the first knot that you do as part of tying your shoes. So I'm going to cross them together. Well, let me make sure that that's visible. I'm going to cross them over one another like that. And then I'm going to take the leading edge and go through the loop underneath that cross, pulling it tight. All right, so that would eventually become loose if you sew through enough signatures, but we're not going to do too many, it's just 3. So I'm going to go in from the bottom. My tendency is to begin at the bottom of the signature because when I'm doing a number of these in a row, I don't want to vary it. Varying it's going to lead to some potential misassumptions about where I am in the process. So I always do the same first maneuver so that my prior assumptions or my later assumptions are going to be correct. So I went right through the bottom, and now I'm going to go through the second one right above it. I'm going to go through the third one next. So essentially I'm just alternating, going in and out. Okay. And see my knot is already trying to work itself out there. Let me make sure that I tighten it. Okay. That's better. All right. So here you can see that I've gone in and out with 3 stitches. And what I want to do now is to pull with the part that has the needle on it out until I've got just a little bit of free thread here at the end, about an index finger's worth. And in order to make sure that I don't have any slack in here, like I've got some slack there, I'm going to grab a hold of the free end and pull against the free end with my right hand, like that. So that should take a lot of the slack out, but we'll keep giving attention to that as we go along. Putting pressure on this with my left hand, I'm going to use the bone folder on it one more time. Okay, so we're creased, flattened back down, we're folded right onto what I've just sewn. And now it's time to do the second signature. The second signature is going to begin with 30, 31, and it's going to go until I believe 56, 57. Yeah, there we go. All right, so that's the third signature. We're not working with it yet. Working with the second signature. All right, so I'm going to fold it like I did with the other, laying it flat, making sure that my corners line up, holding it down with my left hand while I go to the middle, and then going up and down, and then it's time to crease it. Okay. All right, so with that in place, I'm now going to open it up again. And here I'm going to go from the top of signature 1 to the top of signature 2. So the top has that hole that I've already punched through it when I punched all of the papers at once. And now I will pull that pretty close. We'll take the slack out of that in a moment. Then I'll go down to 2 and then into the third. This is pretty much the same process that we did the first time around, except this time instead of working our way up the middle of the signature, we're working our way back down. Make sure that you don't sew through loops like that. You want to make these stitches clean and separate. Okay. And then that is the last one. Now the thing to do here is to kind of begin envisioning this as a set of papers that are going to be together in a book. So I usually fold it over like that. You should have the front of the book here. And right now this is the back of the second signature. It's not the end of the book yet, but it is kind of in the middle. It should be opposite, the front. I'm going to square that up. And what I'm going to do is take the needle in my right hand, and I'm going to, with my left hand, line up these corners at the bottom. The bottom is loose, by the way, right? Like the top is connected with thread, but there's nothing connecting the bottom yet. So I'm going to line those up, put some pressure with my left hand. Make sure that I'm not like folding down that yet. I'm just putting pressure really on this corner, and then I'm going to pull And you could probably see that that caused this gap to close. That took the tension, or sorry, the slack out of the second signature. It brought some tension into that connection, made things a lot tighter so that I'm not loose there. All right, so keeping this held down, I'm going to come in with the bone folder one more time and working from the bottom, putting some pressure here. I'm going to crease and then crease. All right, so the idea there is that my first signature has been sewn and creased, my second has been sewn and creased. They're two, connected snugly, and they're very close. Now the thing that I need to do is to tie a knot between these two signatures, and that's going to be 2 half hitches. It's not a very durable knot, but that's okay. We're going to destroy the knot in a second. So the thing that I'll do is cross them, right? And then I will put the free end underneath in the loop that I just made. And then I'm going to pull until I have a tight knot between the two. There shouldn't be any gap or free space between them at that section. Although there might be right here, right now. All right, so then I'm going to do that again, cross them, put the free end through the loop, and then there we go. So that's 2 half hitches, and for right now that's secure. Okay, I'm going to look back at this and make sure I haven't put any sort of slope or torsion in the spine. I want to keep this as flat as possible as we go along. All right, so that's 2 signatures, and now I will do the third one. Same thing as before, I jog the papers like that. I fold them over, make sure that they are making a symmetrical V over here and that the corners are meeting one another. Holding that flat, I move to the other side, work from the middle up and then down, and then I crease. Okay. So from there I'll open it up again. And this time I'm going to sew from the bottom to the top like I did the first one, beginning of course from the outside. So wanting to work itself loose there, but I'm going to keep it from doing that. Okay, so that's the finish, or rather it's the last set of stitches that I'll put in. I'm not quite finished sewing yet because I do need to connect the third to the first 2 signatures. There's still a little gap here, certainly some slack in here. So what I'm going to do is with this last signature, I'm going to position it over the other 2. I'm going to hold it down with my right hand, and then I'm going to pull the slack out like that. Okay, so you can see that move as the slack was removed. You don't want to pull too hard, and you also don't want to pull in that direction because that's going to rip the paper. So you want to pull in the axis that you're trying to take tension out. That's why I'm pulling in that direction. All right, so now I'm going to make sure that they're lying pretty much in a plane. I'm going to take that slack out one more time. And now I'm going to do what is called the lock stitch. The lock stitch is when you go between, with the needle, signatures 1 and 2, and you go behind the stitch that connects them. So the stitch that connects them is up here. You'll take the needle and go behind it between 1 and 2, pull and make a loop. And then you'll take the needle and bring it through the loop, and then pull it tight, back on itself essentially. And then you'll do that one more time. It's the same procedure. Between 1 and 2, behind the stitch, make a loop, and then pull through the loop, which is going to make it tight. You of course want to make sure that these are tight, that they're not going to roll loose. And then from there, I'm going to trim the remaining thread. So now my needle is free. And I'll trim this tail so that I don't have any extra there either. I haven't eliminated it. I didn't cut flush with the knots or anything like that. There's maybe a few millimeters there. And that's just because I don't want the knots to roll themselves free, if I had to carry this someplace. All right, so there is still a need to make sure that, I'm looking at this flat. It's mostly flat. I think that I'm not going to have too much slope in this one. I do need to fold this, or crease it, the bone folder. So this is on the back of the book. I am creasing the third signature back on top. Really, I'm just trying to put some pressure on the spine to make it anticipate having a, very squarish presence inside of the book. All right, so what I'm about to do is glue this layer, glue a layer of adhesive onto the spine. The glue that I'm going to use is PVA glue. It's a water-soluble glue. I'm going to apply it straight out of this bottle, and then I'm going to spread it with this very inexpensive 1-inch Britstle brush. So when applying glue, you don't want to put too much and you don't want it to run around. I'm going to put a bead from the top to the bottom, and then I'm going to spread this in. The idea is that you don't really want to be seeing the shadows of the spaces between the signatures by the time you're done applying it. The spaces between the signatures should be, covered with a thin film of the glue. If you need to add more, then you add more, but make sure it stays on the spine. The amount of glue that you need to add is going to change as you do a lot of books in sequence. If you are, working so that the brush is already wet, then you need to add less glue. This is a dry brush. The one that I started with was dry, so I added what might have looked like a lot of glue just then, but the brush is soaking up some of it. If the brush is already wet, then that effect won't occur, so you need to put less glue on there than you would with a dry brush. All right, so that's a sewn and glued book block, but we're not done yet. I'm going to just kind of set this off to the side so that it can dry. Usually what I'll do is make sure that the place that a book is resting as it's been glued is with the glued edge facing out over the edge of a table, which is what's happening here. Now, what I've got here is a book block that I have already sewn and which I've already glued the spine of. So sort of like a cooking show, it's like, an hour later, except no time has passed. That's going to dry, but we're going to work with this. This is essentially what would result from letting that dry for 24 hours, which is what I recommend. If we take a look at this, it's the same book. It's got 3 signatures. It's the same paper, same stitch. I have a layer of glue on the outside. It has this sort of yellowish sheen. It's sort of a dull gloss or a matte finish. You could tell that there is something on the surface of it. And the thing that I need to do before I start working with this is to trim down the knots that I made up here and up here. The reason I want to do that is because if I don't trim them down, when I cover the book, those knots are going to be noticeable on the spine. It's going to be kind of odd, so I'm going to flatten that. All right, so what I'm going to use is an Exacto knife. So here we go. I'm basically taking the knife and almost putting it flush with the surface of the spine. And I'm just going in until I trim off, you know, the ever so slightly smallest bump that that knot made. Sometimes these knots can be really big. This one's actually kind of big. It's a little disruptive. And that's just as a result of having that extra thread on it when I made the knot. So I'm just cutting right across it. Because I glued that knot before, everything that I'm cutting off now isn't really needed much. You know, the book's not going to fall apart right now unless you were to really dive in with the knife and destroy a large amount of the material in the book. Cutting through the knot to level it like that won't result in any weakening of the book, because we're about to cover this in glue. Everything that is now exposed thread is going to be glued in just a second. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm going to bring in the cover. The covers that I'll generally use for this book are uncoated 100-pound cover stock. And the shape of it is 11 inches by 10 inches. Really important aspect of how this cover is designed is that if you were to look at it in the light, you'd be observing that the grain of the paper goes with the vertical axis, not with the long axis, but the short one. And that's pretty important because whenever you fold something that is going to be facing the outside like this, you want to make sure that you're folding it with the grain. So in this case, since the grain's going like that, we want to be planning to fold it like this, which is what we're going to do. If the grain were like this, it wouldn't really work for making a cover that folds like that. All right, so the thing that I usually do to prepare using a cover is that I know I'm going to need to line up something on this cover on the other side of it, right at that line, which indicates the bottom of the printed cover. So I'm going to use the awl to make a keyhole there. I'm just putting this out over the edge and basically making a hole right through that line so that when I flip it over, I can see where the hole is, so I can line up something on the back of this without seeing the front of it. All right. Now, given that this is dry, it's good for me to use. I can go ahead and start forming the cover around it. The first thing that I'm going to do is with the back side of the cover here, I'm going to make a soft curve over like this. What I'm looking at now is the front of the cover, and right at this edge is the fold. I want to be positioning the fold right underneath, but not touching the spine text. So this requires a little bit of finesse, and depending on how thick the book is, you would need to be placing this fold in a different position. But I kind of expect that the right position is just a little bit below where the spine text is. So there's a little bit of a displacement there. Notice that this isn't one of those folds where I've come in and tried to crease it. I haven't used the bone folder on it. That's because we kind of want to keep this a loose fold for the time being. The most important thing is not to wear this corner out too much, and not to wear the other corner that we'll place in the spine either, because again, this is uncoated stock. The more wear that uncoated fibers see, the more that it's going to fray. And when it frays, the printing on the paper is going to come off, and so it's just a byproduct of doing an uncoated cover. So we're trying to be gentle as we do that. All right. So once we've made this back fold, what we're going to do is to open it up again, and in my right hand I have the book block with the top facing up. This is obviously going to be the back. This is the back of the cover. So I'm going to, insert this book block into the fold that I just made in the cover. And what I'm doing is I'm, putting pressure against the cover with my left hand as I push in with the book block in my right hand. The idea is that they're meeting here in the middle, and I really just want to get this book block into the angle made by the cover right now. I don't want there to be any space there. All right, I'm putting pressure with the first two fingers of my right hand and with my thumb in my right hand. And what I'm going to do is just sort of, make sure that this angle is meeting everything that I can get with the book block. And now I'm going to take my left hand and fold it over the top of the book block essentially. And as that happens, I'm going to move my right hand away. So there's always some pressure keeping the bottom, this book in place, but it moves from my right hand to my left hand. So again, I start with making sure that they're meeting on the spine. I fold it over the corner, and as that comes down with the left hand, I move away the right hand. Now I'll bring in the right hand again, and I'm going to pinch with my fingers and basically fold this cover right over the top of the book block, which is going to make a rough, locating second fold. And as I do that, I can see that, once again, I've misplaced my folds for the spine, which means I'm going to need to move those a little bit. But I'll do that in process. I'm not going to go through and make a separate fold here and then a separate fold there. What I'm going to do is keep these folds for the time being, but then I'm going to glue this, glue that, and then while these are setting, I will very quickly move the location of this fold. All right, so when I open that back up again, you can see in the shadow that I've got a channel made from two folds. And what I'm going to do is lay down a bead of glue in that channel. I'll spread that with the brush. Make sure it's even inside of the channel. Okay, so that's going to be some adhesive that is going to be contacting the book block, but in order to make sure that there's enough glue in here, I'm going to put another bead on the dried surface of the inside of the spine. So this is glue going in on top of glue right now. And when I put it into the cover, it's going to be even more glue. It's just going to be, well, I won't say glue all over the place because hopefully it's going to be exactly where it needs to be. But, this is going to be a spine that's going to be defined pretty well by the presence of glue. All right, so that's been glued. I'm now going to very quickly, because since we're dealing with glue, I have to work quickly. I'm going to basically bring them together like I had them before. So those are glued surfaces meeting, and I'm going to pinch this corner, make sure it's meeting. And again, I'm noting that, my type is a little close to the top of that fold. So what I want to do is bring that type more toward me, more toward the bottom of the fold. With the book on its front, I'm looking at the back of the book now. The back of the book is facing up. I'm going to take in these fingers, I'm going to push with my thumbs against the back of the book while having the top of the cover in my fingers, and I'm going to basically do that. And then, while I'm continuing to hold pressure on this with the heel of my hand and the other heel of my hand, I'm going to push so that I'm motivating that spine type a little back toward me. It's not supposed to move quickly, and in fact, you really wouldn't want it to move quickly either. But it should make a difference. Let's see if I can get it to move a little more. The nice thing about having to do this step this way is that I'm definitely doing one of the things that you'd want to do no matter what, and that is to make sure that the cover is snug against both of those corners and is lying flat with no space on the book block spine. So with the bone folder, after I've done that, I'm going to move it flat across the spine. Usually put in a notch up there, and a notch down there. Basically, that's me making a slight cross spine fold right underneath where the book block meets the cover. Okay, so I'm doing that. And I really wish I could get that down a little further. So, okay, so I'm basically just trying to put pressure on the spine now to make sure it's flat and straight. So these maneuvers with me curling the book like this, I have been able to move it a little bit away from where it was before, but you know, it's still riding a little bit high. Win some, you lose some, I guess. But now I need to flatten these surfaces as well, the top and the bottom. So I'll put it flat like this. I'm basically looking down this angle so that I can see, oh yes, there's no slope in this. I'm going to flatten that with the bone folder, and I'm going to flatten this way with the bone folder. Okay, and I'm going to look at it like that. That's pretty flat. Okay, that's just about what I want. Now, of course, you would let this dry for about 24 hours. Kind of rest it over next to the other thing that's drying now. And the next step is that I'm going to go from that to this, which is a book that I've already sewn, glued once, glued a second time, let dry. It's basically that after 24 hours. It's time to trim it. So let's trim it so that we can make this into this, the book, as it would be if you were to look at it in a bookstore. To do that, I'm going to need to get the trimmer. So this is the dried and prepared book block that we'll work with. This is a Martin Yale 7000E stack cutter or guillotine cutter. I think that it's supposed to be able to cut like 2 inches, 1.5 inches of paper at a time. We'll be doing far less with this. It comes with a little attachment to make sure that you're getting a right angle cut along this ruler up here. I'm actually not going to use this ruler at all. I never found that useful. After getting this, I constructed a grid that is probably not very visible in detail here, but it's essentially a mylar sheet with 1/2 inches and 1/8 inch markings on it. And I'm going to use that to line things up and make the trim. The difference between this, the finished product, and this, where we are right now, is that this is 8¼ inches tall and 6¼ inches wide. And obviously, that is going to involve trimming off some of the top and some of the bottom and giving a nice flush surface to the outside of the book there. So the first thing I'm going to do is to line up the bottom of the book, which I know is right alongside where this black line is because that's how I lined it up. I'm going to line that up on the grid at 8 3/8 of an inch. The reason I'm aiming for 8 3/8 of an inch is because I know that 8 3/8 of an inch is 1/8 of an inch lower than 8½ inches, and the book block that I just inserted into the cover is 8½ inches tall. So essentially, by doing that 1/8 inch displacement, I'm taking out half of the trim that I need to do. I'll do a trim at the top and a trim at the bottom. So 2 times 1/8 is going to equal the 1/4 inch total that I'm taking off. All right, so I've lined it up. Next thing I'll need to do is to hold it down with my left hand as I clamp it by turning that wheel. Okay, so this kind of requires a little bit of body presence. You have to put pressure down on the book as you are bringing the blade down. Of course, with this design, it is pretty well impossible, since you can't really get your fingers through here, to end up cutting them off and you have your other hand on this. It's a pretty safe design. Anyway, so I'm doing this, I'm holding it down so it doesn't spin or move. If it's clamped, it might still want to spin or move while I trim. Okay, so that's the material from the first cut. Okay, what I just did is I flipped it. So this is the trimmed top edge. Now I need to trim the bottom. And the way that I'll know where I have the book correctly is I'm going to line it up at 8 1/4 inches at the top now. So now when I bring down the blade, it's going to leave the book as 8 1/4 inches tall, which is exactly how tall I want it to be. In the process, it will remove 1/8 of an inch of the book block and, you know, some of the cover around it, because the cover is bigger than the book block. All right. So holding that down after I clamped it, that click is the sign of assurance. You know that you've actually gotten to the bottom when you hear that. Okay, so that's the top and the bottom trim. Now the next thing is that I need to do the outside trim. So essentially I'll need to make sure that my ragged edges from the 3 signatures here get trimmed down into a flat surface. I'm going to do that at 6 1/4 inches away from the spine. So I'll line this up here at 6 1/4 inches. And then I will hold it flat while I clamp it, like this. All right. Holding it flat with my hand, I will then cut. And then I'll take it out. All right. So that is the last trim. And essentially this is now exactly where we wanted to end up. This is a book that's 8 1/4 inches tall, 6 1/4 inches wide, has a flush edge here, and is sewn exactly in the process that we were looking at before.